Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. It's great to have you here. You know, there's an old saying that imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. It's a nice thought, isn't it? It suggests that when someone copies you, it's a form of admiration, a tribute to your original genius. But let's be honest with ourselves for a moment. In the real world, more often than not, it isn't flattery. It's just theft. It's the lazy person's shortcut to success, built on the foundation of someone else's late nights, their passion, and their hard work. So what happens when someone steals your brilliant idea, your masterpiece of a plan, your meticulously crafted project, but they forget to steal the most important part? What happens when they steal the blueprint, but they forget to steal the talent, the skill, and the experience required to actually build the thing? Well, that's when you get to witness something truly special. It's a unique brand of karmic justice, where the universe itself seems to step in and foreclose on the fraud. Today, we're diving deep into stories of that very phenomenon. These are tales of karmic bankruptcy, where thieves of ingenuity end up undone, not by revenge, but by their own staggering incompetence. Grab your coffee, get comfortable, because we're about to watch some train wrecks in glorious slow motion. Our first story takes us into the cutthroat world of corporate ambition, where a brilliant idea can be your ticket to the top, or the reason you get thrown out the door. This is a story about a man who built a ladder, only to have his boss kick it out from under him to climb it himself. But what this boss failed to realize is that getting to the top is one thing, staying there is another entirely. The protagonist of our story, let's call him David, was a senior developer at a mid-sized marketing tech firm. He was good at his job, respected by his peers, and had a knack for seeing problems not as roadblocks, but as opportunities. For months, he'd been wrestling with a particular inefficiency in their workflow. The company managed social media campaigns for dozens of clients, and a huge chunk of their manpower was wasted on manually compiling and formatting performance reports. It was tedious, mind-numbing work, prone to human error and universally hated by the junior staff who had to do it. David saw a solution, not a patch, not a workaround, but a full-fledged, elegant piece of software, an automated analytics dashboard, a tool that would not only do the work of 3 employees in about 10 seconds, but would also provide deeper, more valuable insights for their clients using predictive analytics. It was, in his mind, the future of their business model. He didn't just have the idea, he nurtured it. For 6 months, his life outside of work became a quiet obsession. While his colleagues were binge-watching the latest shows, David was at his home office, surrounded by whiteboards covered in diagrams and a screen glowing with lines of code. He spent his own money on server space and development tools. He poured countless hours into building a working prototype, a sleek, functional proof of concept. The user interface was intuitive, the data visualizations were beautiful, and the back-end code was a work of art, efficient and scalable. This wasn't just a feature, it was a standalone product, a potential new revenue stream for the company, a business venture all its own. He felt a surge of pride every time he ran a test and watched it perform flawlessly. This was his baby. Finally, the day came when he was ready. He booked a meeting with his boss, a man we'll call Mr. Thompson. Thompson was a classic corporate archetype, silver hair, expensive suit, and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He was a salesman by trade who had climbed the ladder, not through innovation, but through appropriation. He was a master of positioning himself to catch the credit when things went well and deflecting the blame when they didn't. David walked into Thompson's spacious corner office, the prototype loaded on his laptop, his heart thumping with a mixture of nervous energy and excitement. The office was immaculate, sterile even. The large oak desk was clear save for a leather-bound planner and a single, pretentious Newton's cradle. The air smelled faintly of expensive cologne and ambition. "David, good to see you," Thompson said, gesturing to one of the 2 stiff leather chairs opposite his desk. "You said you had something promising." "I think so, sir," David began, his voice steadier than he felt. He launched into his pitch. He didn't just show Thompson the software, he told the story behind it. He laid out the problem, the man-hours lost, the client complaints about the slow turnaround on reports. He painted a picture of inefficiency and frustration. Then with a click, he brought the prototype to life on the large monitor on the wall. "And this," he said, his voice filled with passion, "is the solution." He walked Thompson through the dashboard. He showed him the one-click report generation, the customizable metrics, the predictive modeling that could forecast campaign performance with surprising accuracy. He outlined the business case. They could offer this as a premium service to existing clients, or even license it as a standalone software-as-a-service product to other agencies. It was a new, multi-million-dollar business vertical waiting to be born. Throughout the presentation, Thompson was unnervingly quiet. He leaned forward, his chin resting on his steepled fingers, his eyes laser-focused on the screen. He asked sharp, intelligent questions, not just about the functionality, but about the architecture, the deployment strategy, the potential pricing models. David, thrilled by the engagement, answered every question in exhaustive detail. He held nothing back. He explained the database structure, the specific APIs he was leveraging, the server requirements. He thought he was impressing his boss with his thoroughness. In reality, he was giving him the keys to the kingdom. When the demonstration was over, Thompson leaned back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. It was the smile of a shark that had just spotted a particularly plump seal. "David," he said, his voice smooth as silk, "this is extraordinary, truly. I'm very impressed. Leave the laptop with me. I want to play around with the prototype myself and show it to the other partners. This is big. You could be in for a major promotion here." David felt a wave of elation wash over him. It was happening. His hard work, his vision, it was all going to pay off. He practically floated out of the office, leaving his laptop, the culmination of 6 months of his life, sitting on that polished oak desk. For a week he heard nothing. The silence was unsettling. He sent a follow-up email which went unanswered. When he saw Thompson in the hallway, his boss gave him a curt nod and hurried away, suddenly too busy to talk. A cold knot of dread began to form in David's stomach. He started to feel a creeping suspicion, a sense of profound unease that he tried to dismiss as paranoia. But he couldn't shake the feeling that he had made a terrible, terrible mistake. The following Monday, he was called into an unscheduled meeting. It wasn't in Thompson's office. It was in a small, windowless conference room with a woman from human resources he'd never seen before. Thompson was there, his expression unreadable, almost bored. The HR representative slid a folder across the table. "David," Thompson began, avoiding eye contact and staring at a point on the wall just over David's shoulder. "As you know, the market is shifting. We're restructuring the department to better align with our strategic goals. Unfortunately, as part of that restructuring, your position has been made redundant." The words hit David like a physical blow. Redundant? He was one of their top developers. It made no sense. He looked from Thompson's impassive face to the HR woman's sympathetic but firm expression. The folder contained his severance papers. It was a joke, a pittance. "My project," David stammered, his mind racing. "The analytics dashboard, what about it?" Thompson finally met his gaze, and for the first time, David saw a flicker of something in his eyes, cold, dismissive contempt. "The company has decided to pursue that project internally," he said flatly. "Your services are no longer required. We'll have security escort you to your desk to collect your personal belongings." The walk back to his desk was the longest of David's life. A security guard, a large, impassive man named Frank who usually just waved good morning, followed him like a shadow. His colleagues stared, their faces a mixture of shock and pity, quickly looking away when he caught their eye. He packed his photos, his favorite mug, a couple of programming books, all into a small cardboard box. He felt a burning humiliation. He wasn't just fired, he was being erased. As he was escorted out of the building, the glass doors sliding shut behind him, He looked up at the gleaming corporate logo and felt a rage so pure and so cold it sharpened his thoughts into a single, diamond-hard resolve. Thompson had stolen his work, his idea, and his job. This would not be the end of it. For the first few weeks, David was adrift in a sea of anger and disbelief. He replayed that final meeting in his mind 1,000 times, each time feeling the fresh sting of betrayal. He saw the company's official press release a month later. It announced the launch of a new, revolutionary analytics platform, a subsidiary of the main company. The CEO of this new venture, Mr. Thompson. The press release was filled with quotes from Thompson, talking about his vision and the months of tireless development his team had put in. David's name was nowhere to be found. He had been completely written out of his own story. The anger was a fire, but David knew that uncontrolled fire just burns itself out. He needed to channel it, to turn it from a destructive force into a constructive one. He had his severance, which wasn't much, and his savings. He made a decision. Thompson had stolen the prototype, but he hadn't stolen the architect. Thompson had the blueprint, but he didn't have the skills to build the house, let alone maintain it. And this is where the first critical error of our thief comes into play. Thompson fundamentally misunderstood what he had stolen. He thought the value was in the code, the finished product he saw on the screen. He failed to understand that a piece of software isn't a static object like a chair or a painting. It's a living, breathing thing. It requires constant updates, bug fixes, client-specific customizations, and a deep, intuitive understanding of the underlying logic to troubleshoot when things go wrong. And things always, eventually, go wrong. David got to work. He didn't just rebuild his dashboard, he made it 10 times better. He knew the original code's weaknesses, its potential breaking points. He rewrote it from the ground up, making it more robust, more efficient, and more feature-rich. He added new modules he'd only dreamed of before. He called his new company Clarity Analytics, a small, pointed jab at the obfuscation and theft he'd experienced. He built a simple website, registered the business, and waited. Meanwhile, Thompson's new venture was having its grand launch. They had a slick marketing campaign, a fancy new logo, and they signed up 6 of the parent company's biggest clients right off the bat, lured by the promise of this revolutionary technology. The initial buzz was huge. But then the problems started. Small things at first. A client in the healthcare sector needed a specific data filter to comply with privacy regulations. A simple request, but the developer Thompson had hired to maintain David's stolen code couldn't figure out how to implement it without breaking the entire reporting module. He was a decent coder, but he was working with someone else's vision, someone else's logic. It was like asking a mechanic, who has only ever worked on Fords, to fix a Ferrari by looking at the owner's manual. Then a major social media platform updated its API. It was a routine change, something David would have anticipated and patched in a single afternoon. For Thompson's team, it was a catastrophe. Their dashboard, which was built around this API, suddenly stopped pulling in new data. Reports were coming up blank. The whole system was crippled. Panic ensued. Clients started calling and they weren't happy. They were paying a premium for this cutting-edge service, and it was failing at the most basic level. And who was the person they had to talk to? Mr. Thompson, the great visionary. But Thompson couldn't answer their technical questions. He'd bluster and promise a fix, then hang up and scream at his hapless development team, who were frantically trying to reverse-engineer David's work. They were archaeologists trying to decipher hieroglyphics without a Rosetta Stone. This was David's moment. He had been quietly monitoring industry forums and professional social networks. He started seeing whispers of discontent, anonymous posts from marketers complaining about this new, buggy analytics platform. He compiled a list of the clients he knew his old company served. He picked up the phone. His first call was to a marketing director at a major retail brand, a woman he'd worked with before and had a good relationship with. "Let's call her Sarah." "Sarah, it's David," he began. I know this is out of the blue, but I heard you might be having some issues with your new analytics platform." There was a pause on the other end of the line, then a heavy sigh. "David, that's the understatement of the century. The thing is a disaster. It hasn't worked in a week, and the CEO over there, Thompson, keeps giving us the runaround. We're about to pull our contract." David's heart beat a little faster. This was it. "Sarah, what if I told you I could offer you a platform that does everything you were promised, but it actually works? And what if I told you I built it myself from the ground up?" He explained the situation tactfully, professionally. He didn't badmouth Thompson directly. He didn't have to. He just laid out the facts. He was the original architect of the concept they had bought into. He now ran his own independent company. He could give them a personal, 1-week free trial of his new, superior platform, Clarity Analytics, starting immediately. The desperation in Sarah's voice was palpable. "Can you have us set up by tomorrow?" she asked. "I can have you set up in the next hour," David replied. He did, and it worked. It worked perfectly. It was faster, cleaner, and had features that Thompson's stolen version didn't. The API issue, David had already accounted for it. The custom filters she needed, he built and deployed them for her in a single evening. For Sarah and her team, it was like being rescued from a deserted island. 2 days later, Clarity Analytics had its first signed contract. A massive one. Sarah had not only signed her company up, but she had also started spreading the word. She told 2 other marketing directors in her network who were also clients of Thompson's failing venture. David's phone started ringing. The process repeated itself. A disgruntled client would vent their frustrations. David would listen patiently, and then he would offer them the solution. The life raft. One by one, he began poaching Thompson's clients. They were leaving in droves, flocking from the sinking ship to David's sleek, new vessel. He was not just taking back what was stolen. He was taking the entire market Thompson had tried to corner. David never spoke to Thompson again. He didn't need to. He just watched from the sidelines. He saw the bad press accumulate. He saw the scathing reviews on software review sites. He imagined the panicked, furious meetings happening in that corner office. The final nail in the coffin came about 6 months after the launch. An industry blog published a devastating exposé, detailing the platform's failures and interviewing several anonymous former clients who all told the same story. A great initial pitch, followed by a catastrophic failure to deliver. The article speculated that the company's leadership lacked the technical expertise to support the product they were selling. 2 weeks after that article was published, the website for Thompson's company went offline. A simple under-construction page took its place, the digital equivalent of a tombstone. The venture was dead. Thompson had not only failed to launch a new business, but his spectacular, public failure had also cost the parent company millions in revenue and irrevocably damaged its reputation. He was quietly fired a few weeks later. David, on the other hand, was just getting started. Clarity Analytics was thriving. He was hiring his own staff, leasing a real office, and building a reputation for excellence and reliability. He had taken his worst professional nightmare and turned it into his greatest success. So let's pause here and really break down the beautiful, karmic implosion we just witnessed. Thompson's failure is a masterclass in a specific type of arrogance. It's the arrogance of the manager who believes that the people who do the actual work are just interchangeable cogs in a machine. He saw David's idea not as the product of a unique mind and a specific skill set, but as a commodity he could simply acquire and possess. He thought he had stolen a golden goose, but all he'd actually done was steal a single golden egg and then starve the goose to death. His first mistake was pure hubris. He assumed that possessing the code was the same as understanding it. He couldn't distinguish between the artifact, the prototype, and the process that created it. That's a critical blind spot for so many idea thieves. They see the finished car and they think they can just drive it, forgetting that it needs a trained mechanic, a steady supply of fuel, and a driver who actually knows the rules of the road. David wasn't just the code's author. He was its first and most experienced mechanic. When the engine inevitably sputtered, Thompson was left standing on the side of the road with the hood up, staring blankly at a complex machine he had no hope of understanding. The second mistake was his failure to appreciate the human element of business. The clients weren't just buying a piece of software, they were buying a relationship and a promise of support. When things went wrong, they needed a competent expert to fix it, not a slick salesman to give them excuses. David's revenge wasn't loud or aggressive. It was quiet, surgical, and deeply effective. He didn't try to sink Thompson's ship with a torpedo. He just built a better, safer, faster ship and sailed by, offering a lifeline to everyone who was jumping overboard. He sold competence and reliability, the two things Thompson could never deliver. In the end, David didn't have to destroy his former boss. Thompson's own incompetence, his own lack of vision beyond the initial theft, did all the work for him. It's a perfect illustration of the principle that you can't build a lasting empire on a stolen foundation. All right, moving on from the cold, calculating world of corporate software to something a little more grounded, a little more delicious. Our next story is about a dream that many of us have had, turning a passion into a business. It's about handcrafted recipes, unique branding, and the vision for a one-of-a-kind food truck. But it's also a cautionary tale about sharing your dreams with the wrong people. This is what happens when a so-called friend decides to steal your entire, meticulously planned business concept, only to find out that you can't just copy a recipe. You have to have the soul of a chef. Our protagonist, who we'll call Maria, was an artist, not with a paintbrush but with a skillet. For years, she had been the star of every potluck, the friend everyone begged to bring her signature dish to parties. Her specialty was a unique fusion concept, blending the vibrant, spicy flavors of her grandmother's traditional Mexican cooking with the smoky, comforting techniques of American barbecue. Think slow-smoked carnitas tacos with a chipotle-infused barbecue sauce, or brisket tortas with a tangy cilantro slaw and pickled jalapenos. It was unique, it was mouth-watering, and it was all hers. For over 2 years, Maria had been methodically and passionately planning to bring this vision to life in the form of a food truck she would call the Smockin' Sombrero. This wasn't a whim. It was a full-blown obsession. She had a thick 3-ring binder that was practically bursting at the seams. It was her Bible. Inside, there was everything. There were dozens of pages dedicated to her recipes, tested and tweaked to perfection, with secret ingredients and precise cooking times that only she knew. There was the full business plan, complete with market analysis, detailed financial projections, and a list of potential suppliers. She had even designed the logo herself, a stylized smoking sombrero, and had sketches for the truck's vinyl wrap, a vibrant mural of sugar skulls and barbecue flames. She had scouted locations, researched health codes, and attended workshops on small business management. She was all in. During this time, her closest confidant was her friend, Jessica. They had been friends since college, and Maria shared every new development with her, every small victory. When she finally perfected her signature volcano queso, she had Jessica over to be the first to taste it. When she got a pre-approval for a small business loan, Jessica was the first person she called, squealing with excitement. She trusted Jessica implicitly, pouring out every detail of her dream over countless cups of coffee. Jessica, for her part, always seemed incredibly supportive. "Maria, this is brilliant," she'd say. "You're going to be so successful. This is a $1 million idea." Maria, buoyed by the encouragement, shared everything, even the contents of her precious binder. She saw Jessica as her biggest cheerleader. She failed to see the green glint of envy that was slowly starting to curdle in her friend's eyes. The plan was for Maria to quit her boring office job in the spring and launch the truck by early summer, just in time for the city's festival season. As spring approached, she noticed Jessica started to become distant. Texts went unanswered for days. Coffee dates were canceled at the last minute with flimsy excuses. Maria was hurt and confused. She worried she had done something to offend her friend, but she couldn't imagine what. The The slow fade turned into a complete ghosting. Jessica had vanished from her life. The reason why became brutally clear about a month later. A friend sent Maria a screenshot from Instagram. It was a post from a new food truck that had just opened in a trendy part of town, about 20 minutes from where Maria lived. The truck was painted a garish, bright yellow, and on the side, in a clunky, generic font, was the name, the Saucy Sombrero. Maria's blood ran cold. It was a cheap, ugly imitation of her name. Then she looked at the menu in the picture. Her heart hammered against her ribs. It was her menu, her dishes, smoked carnitas tacos, barbecue brisket tortas. Even the name of her queso was there, slightly altered to lava queso. It was a brazen, wholesale theft of her entire concept. Jessica, her trusted friend, her confidant, hadn't just stolen a few ideas. She had ripped the soul out of Maria's dream and was now parading its grotesque, poorly made skin around town. The sense of betrayal was suffocating. It felt like a physical violation. All those late nights, all that passion and meticulous planning, it had all been a resource for Jessica to mine. Maria went through a whirlwind of emotions, shock, white-hot fury, and then a deep, crushing sadness. She felt like a fool for being so open, so trusting. For a week, she couldn't even look at her binder. The dream felt tainted, ruined. She was tempted to give up entirely. But then, a new feeling started to bubble up through the grief, a cold, hard curiosity. Jessica had the blueprint, yes. She had the list of ingredients and the names of the dishes. But did she have the magic? Did she have the touch, the palate, the years of practice that made Maria's food special? Maria knew her grandmother's secret spice blend for the carnitas wasn't written down in that binder. She knew the precise temperature and timing for the smoker to get the brisket perfectly tender wasn't something you could just read off a page. An idea came to her. She wasn't going to confront Jessica. She wasn't going to make a scene. She was just going to watch. So began Maria's period of quiet, morbid observation. She followed the Saucy Sombrero on every social media platform. She read every single review that popped up on Yelp and Google, and what she saw was, in a word, glorious. It was a slow-motion train wreck, and she had a front row seat. The first critical error Jessica made was a classic one for thieves. She mistook the ingredients list for the recipe. She knew what went into the food, but she had no idea how to combine it all with skill and love. The reviews started trickling in, and they were brutal. "I was so excited to try this place," one Yelp review read. "The concept sounded amazing. The reality was sad. The smoked carnitas tasted like they'd been boiled and then vaguely threatened with some smoke flavoring. It was a mushy, gray tragedy in a tortilla." Another reviewer commented on the brisket torta. "The brisket was tough as shoe leather and completely dry. I think I chipped a tooth. And the tangy slaw they mentioned was just some shredded cabbage drowning in mayonnaise. Avoid at all costs." Her signature lava queso was a frequent target of ridicule. "It was neither lava nor queso," a Google review lamented. "It was a gritty, oily, separated mess that had the consistency of lukewarm despair. We sent it back." Maria read these reviews with a grim, validating satisfaction. Each one was a testament to Jessica's incompetence. She had the words, but she couldn't make the music. Jessica's second critical error was her complete lack of business acumen or customer service skills. The reviews weren't just about the terrible food. They were about the entire experience. People complained about the excruciatingly long wait times, even when there were only a few people in line. They mentioned how disorganized the staff seemed, how orders were frequently wrong. But the real gold was Jessica's responses to the negative reviews. She didn't apologize or offer to make things right. She attacked. To a one-star review complaining about the dry brisket, she replied publicly, "Maybe you just have uneducated taste buds. Our brisket is authentic and real barbecue fans love it. Sorry it was too sophisticated for you." To a customer who posted a photo of their sad-looking tacos, she wrote, "Our food looks amazing. That's just a bad picture you took with your cheap phone. Don't blame us for your terrible photography skills." It was a masterclass in how to alienate every potential customer and torch your own reputation. She was arrogant, defensive, and completely unprofessional. Each angry response was another shovel of dirt on her business's grave. Maria watched the social media follower count for the saucy sombrero stagnate, then begin to drop. The initial flurry of interest died down, replaced by a reputation for being the worst food truck in the city. The pictures Jessica posted of the truck showed smaller and smaller crowds until it was just pictures of the truck itself, parked forlornly with the service window open, but with no customers in sight. She started running desperate-looking promotions. Taco Tuesday, 50% off. Then 2-for-1 Wednesday. Nothing worked. You can't discount your way out of having a terrible product. All the while, Maria was quietly, methodically getting her own dream back on track. The betrayal had lit a fire under her. Her sadness had hardened into resolve. She took out her loan. She found the perfect used truck and spent weeks restoring it with her father. She hired a professional artist to paint her vibrant sugar skull mural on the side. She perfected her recipes even further, sourcing her ingredients from local farms. She built her own social media presence, teasing her future launch with gorgeous, professional-quality photos of her actual, delicious-looking food. She didn't mention Jessica or the stolen idea once. She just focused on quality and authenticity. The end for the saucy sombrero came about 4 months after its launch. The social media accounts went silent. A week later, a local urban explorer posted a photo in a Facebook group dedicated to abandoned places. It was a picture of the garish yellow truck parked behind a dilapidated warehouse, one of its tires flat, a fine layer of dust and grime covering its windows. It was over. 2 weeks after that, the Smockin sombrero had its grand opening. Maria had built up a huge amount of positive buzz. The story of a local woman finally realizing her passion project had resonated with people. For her launch, the line stretched down the block and around the corner. People who had been burned by the imitation were now eager to try the real thing. And the food, it was everything Jessica's wasn't. The carnitas were smoky, tender, and juicy. The brisket was so soft you could cut it with a plastic fork. The volcano queso was creamy, spicy, and utterly addictive. The reviews that poured in were ecstatic. 5 stars. A flavor explosion. The best tacos in the city, hands down. You can taste the love in every bite. Maria never heard from Jessica again. She didn't need to. Her revenge wasn't in confrontation, it was in her success. It was in the long line of happy customers, in the glowing reviews, in the satisfaction of knowing that she had built something real and lasting, while the cheap imitation had crumbled into dust under the weight of its own mediocrity. She had proven that a dream is more than just a plan written in a binder. It's the skill, the passion, and the heart of the dreamer. And that is something that can never, ever be stolen. This story is just so satisfying because it operates on such a fundamental level. Food is personal, it's authentic, and unlike corporate software where a bad product might just be an inconvenience, bad food is an immediate, visceral failure. You can't hide it. Your customers know from the very first bite. Jessica's failure was inevitable from the moment she decided to steal the idea because she was missing the one essential ingredient: talent. Her arrogance was in thinking that a recipe is just a list of instructions like assembling IKEA furniture. Anyone who has ever tried to replicate a beloved family recipe knows that's not true. There's a feel, a timing, an instinct that can't be written down. Maria had that. It was in her culinary DNA. Jessica had a photocopy. She could mimic the form, but she could never capture the substance. Furthermore, her reaction to criticism reveals the core difference between a passionate creator and a cynical thief. Maria, in her planning, had sections in her binder for handling customer feedback. She saw it as a tool for improvement. Jessica saw it as a personal attack. She had no passion for the craft, so she had no desire to get better. She just wanted the success she thought the idea would bring her, and when it didn't come easily, she became defensive and hostile. She wasn't building a community around her business. She was building a wall. And in the end, she was the only one left trapped inside it. It's a perfect, delicious example of just desserts. Our third story takes us from the kitchen into the server room, a world of complex logic and digital architecture, where a single misplaced semicolon can bring a multi-million-dollar system to its knees. This is a story about a lazy coworker who thought he could ride someone else's genius all the way to a promotion. He was about to learn a very hard lesson. When you steal code you don't understand, you're not just stealing a file. You're stealing a live, ticking time bomb, and you're pointing it directly at your own career. Let's meet Liam. Liam was a senior software engineer at a fast-growing financial tech company. He was known as the go-to guy for the really tough problems, the kind of developer who could untangle a knot of legacy code that would make most people weep. He was quiet, focused, and deeply passionate about writing elegant, efficient code. He saw it as a craft, a form of problem-solving that was as creative as it was technical. Working on his team was another developer we'll call Gary. Gary was, to put it kindly, not on Liam's level. In fact, he wasn't on anyone's level. Gary was a master of corporate camouflage. He talked a big game in meetings, using all the right buzzwords and acronyms. He was an expert at looking busy, staring intently at his screen with a furrowed brow, but his actual output was minimal and often riddled with bugs that people like Liam would have to quietly fix later. Gary's primary skill wasn't coding, it was taking credit. If a project he was even tangentially associated with succeeded, he would find a way to frame himself as a key contributor. He was a parasite, and Liam's latest project was looking particularly nutritious. The project was a big one. The company was rolling out a new, high-stakes feature for their flagship investment platform. It involved creating a sophisticated algorithm that could analyze market data in real time and provide predictive risk assessments. It was the kind of complex, mission-critical work that was right in Liam's wheelhouse. For 2 months, he had been working tirelessly on it, designing the architecture and writing the core logic from scratch. This wasn't just a simple script, it was a beast. It had multiple dependencies, it connected to several different internal and external data APIs, and for it to work properly, it needed to run in a very specific, carefully configured server environment that Liam had set up on his local development machine. This is a key detail. Think of it like a high-performance race car engine. On its own, sitting on a workbench, it's an impressive piece of engineering. But to actually do anything, it needs to be installed in the car, connected to the fuel line, the transmission, the exhaust, and a dozen other systems. Without that specific car, the server environment, the engine is just a very heavy, very expensive paperweight. Liam was about 80% done with the core development. The algorithm worked, but it was still rough. It had no error handling. The user interface was just a placeholder, and it was still littered with his own debugging notes and test code. It was the digital equivalent of a brilliant novel's first draft, full of potential but nowhere near ready for public consumption. Gary, of course, had been watching Liam's progress with greedy eyes. A major presentation to the company's senior leadership, including the chief technology officer, was coming up. All the senior developers were expected to present their progress on key initiatives. Gary had been assigned a much less glamorous task, some routine database maintenance, and he had almost nothing to show for it. He saw Liam's project as his golden ticket. The theft itself was pathetically simple. The company had a shared code repository, a central place where all the code was stored. While Liam's project was in a private branch, he had made the mistake of briefly merging some of his foundational code into a shared development branch a week earlier. He had quickly reverted it, but for a few hours, his work in progress had been accessible. That was all the time Gary needed. He had quietly made a copy of the entire project folder. He had the code. He had the engine. He just had no idea that he didn't have the car. Liam found out by accident. He was helping another developer troubleshoot an issue and happened to glance at Gary's screen. For a split second, he saw his own code, his own distinct variable names and comment style. He froze. There was no reason for Gary to have that code. He confronted Gary privately in the hallway. "Hey Gary, I couldn't help but notice you had my risk assessment project open on your machine. What's that about?" Liam asked, keeping his voice even. Gary's reaction was a masterclass in terrible lying. He blanched, then sputtered. "Oh, yeah, I was just, looking at it for inspiration, trying to learn from the best, you know." He gave a weak, sycophantic laugh. Liam knew he was lying. He could feel it. But then an idea, cold and sharp, formed in his mind. The big presentation was in 2 days. Gary had a copy of his unfinished, highly unstable code. A code that he knew with 100% certainty would not run anywhere except on Liam's own machine. A slow smile played on Liam's lips. "Okay, Gary," he said. "Just be careful with it. It's not quite ready for prime time." He walked away, leaving Gary looking relieved. Liam had just handed him enough rope to hang himself, and he was already starting to tie the noose. Liam made a conscious decision. He was going to do nothing. He was going to sit back and let the laws of computer science enact their own brutal, logical justice. 2 days later, it was showtime. The main boardroom was packed. The CEO was there, the CTO, all the VPs. The air was thick with tension and the smell of lukewarm coffee. Liam gave his presentation, showing some of the other, less critical work he had been doing. It went well. Then it was Gary's turn. Gary strode to the front of the room with a swagger that was entirely unearned. He was wearing a new, slightly too shiny suit. He plugged his laptop into the projector, and a PowerPoint slide appeared with the title, Project Chimera, a paradigm shift in real-time risk analytics. He had even given it a flashy, ridiculous name. "Good morning," Gary began, his voice booming with false confidence. "For the past 2 months, I've been leading a Skunkworks initiative to develop a next-generation predictive analytics engine. What you're about to see is not just an evolution, it's a revolution." Liam just sat back, folded his arms, and tried to keep a neutral expression, but inside he was giddy. This was going to be even better than he had imagined. Gary spent 5 minutes clicking through slides filled with incomprehensible diagrams and buzzwords he had clearly just copied from tech blogs. Then came the grand finale. "But enough talk," he said with a dramatic flourish. "Let me show you the magic." He switched from his PowerPoint to a code editor and a command terminal. It was Liam's code, all right. He had changed a few of the comments to try and pass it off as his own, but it was unmistakable. He hit the run command. And then nothing happened. Well, not nothing. A few lines of text appeared on the screen, the program trying to initialize, and then it stopped. A long, ugly error message flooded the terminal, a cascade of red text that screamed failure. The program had crashed. Hard. An awkward silence fell over the room. Gary, for his part, looked completely bewildered. He stared at the screen, his confident smirk melting into a mask of pure panic. He had run the program on his own laptop dozens of times, but he'd just been clicking on the file, not actually running it from the command line in a presentation environment. He had no idea what he was even looking at. "Uh-oh, looks like we're having a little technical gremlin," Gary said with a nervous chuckle, frantically typing the same run command over and over, as if that would somehow change the result. The same red error message appeared each time. The CTO, a stern, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Albright, leaned forward. She had been a coder herself for 20 years before moving into management, and she had no patience for theatrics. "What's the error, Gary?" she asked, her voice cutting through the silence. "Walk us through the stack trace." This was the moment of truth. A stack trace is essentially a detailed report of what a program was doing right before it crashed. Any competent developer can read one and get a good idea of what went wrong. For Gary, it might as well have been written in ancient Sumerian. It looks like a null pointer exception," he stammered, guessing at one of the most common types of errors. It was the wrong guess. Ms. Albright squinted at the screen. "No, it's not. It says it can't connect to the database driver on localhost. Why is your presentation demo hard-coded to connect to a local database? That's a rookie mistake. Show me the configuration file. Gary's face was ashen. He fumbled through the project folders, his hands shaking. He couldn't find it because he didn't know what he was looking for. He didn't know how the program was configured because he hadn't written it. I must have grabbed the wrong version, he mumbled, sweat beading on his forehead. My most recent code is on my other machine. Ms. Albright had seen enough. Her eyes narrowed. She turned her gaze from the floundering Gary to the silent, watching Liam. Liam, she said, this code looks familiar. I saw a similar architecture in your last quarterly review. Can you come up here and tell us what's going on? Liam stood up and walked calmly to the front of the room. He felt every eye on him. He looked at the error message on the screen for a moment, then at the code. He knew exactly what was wrong because he had designed it that way. The program is failing because it's trying to connect to a specific instance of a PostgreSQL database that runs in a Docker container on my development machine, he explained, his voice clear and steady. It also needs a specific set of API keys to access the live market data streams, which are stored in an environment file on that same machine. Without that specific environment and those keys, the program can't initialize. It's a security feature. He didn't have to say another word. The implication was crystal clear. The only way this code could ever run was on Liam's computer. The entire room understood. Gary hadn't written a single line of it. He was a fraud. Gary stood there frozen, his face a ghastly shade of pale. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He had been so utterly, so completely, so technically exposed that there was no lie, no excuse that could possibly save him. Ms. Albright just stared at Gary for a long, cold moment. Then she turned to Liam. Liam, thank you for the clarification. Please continue with your original work. I expect a full demo, running in the proper test environment by the end of the week. She then turned back to Gary, her voice dropping to an icy whisper. Gary, my office, now. Gary was fired that afternoon. He was escorted out of the building by security, carrying his own little cardboard box of shame. Liam, on the other hand, got a formal commendation from the CTO and a significant bonus at the end of the quarter. His spectacularly failed code had done exactly what it was supposed to do. It had performed flawlessly as an unshakable, undeniable lie detector. The beautiful, brutal logic of this story is just so perfect. It's a revenge plot written in source code. Gary's downfall was so complete because he ventured into a world where bluffing is impossible. In marketing or sales, a charismatic person can sometimes talk their way around a lack of substance. But in programming, the code either runs or it doesn't. There is no middle ground. The terminal is the ultimate arbiter of truth, and it has no sympathy for your excuses. Gary's fatal flaw was the same as our other thieves, but magnified by the technical environment. He stole the files on his computer, but had zero grasp of the how or the why. He was like someone who steals a pilot's flight plan and thinks that's all they need to fly a 747. The second he was asked to deviate, to actually demonstrate a fundamental understanding of his own work, he was exposed. Ms. Albright, the CTO, didn't even need a full confession. His inability to answer a basic diagnostic question was more damning than any witness testimony. Liam's role in this is also fascinating. His revenge was entirely passive. He didn't plan a virus or sabotage the code. He just allowed the code's inherent complexity, the very thing that made it valuable, to become Gary's executioner. He knew that the safeguards and dependencies he had built into his work in progress would also function as a perfect trap. He simply stepped back and allowed Gary's own ignorance and arrogance to lead him directly into it. It's a powerful reminder that in highly skilled fields, the work itself is often the best defense against fraud. You can't fake the funk, as they say, and Gary was the funkiest of them all. Now, we move from the digital realm back into the physical office, but the stakes are just as high. Our next story deals with one of the most common and soul-crushing forms of workplace betrayal, having your promotion stolen. It's about a backstabbing coworker who takes credit for your hard work to climb one rung higher on the ladder. But as our protagonist demonstrates, sometimes the best revenge isn't fighting back. Sometimes it's walking away and letting your absence create a vacuum of incompetence so massive that it implodes, taking the thief down with it. Let's set the scene. Our narrator, we'll call him Mark, was a senior project manager at a large engineering firm. He was meticulous, experienced, and well-respected by his team and the clients he worked with. For over a year, he had been the lead on a massive, company-defining project, designing a new automated logistics system for a huge manufacturing client. It was a complex, multi-million-dollar contract that was set to be the crown jewel in the firm's portfolio. Working alongside him in a parallel role was another senior project manager named Alan. Alan was Mark's opposite in almost every way. Where Mark was quiet, methodical, and focused on the technical details, Alan was slick, political, and focused on managing perceptions. He spent more time networking with upper management in the hallways than he did managing his actual projects. He was a master of making his small contributions sound monumental and ensuring he was always CC'd on the right emails. A director-level position opened up, overseeing the entire project management division. It was a major step up, and it quickly became clear that the final two candidates were Mark and Alan. For Mark, the promotion was the logical next step in his career, a recognition of his expertise and his success in leading the company's most important project. For Alan, it was simply the next prize to be won, another notch on his belt. The final decision was to be based heavily on the success of the new logistics system project. As the lead, Mark was pouring his heart and soul into it. He was working 60-hour weeks, coordinating with dozens of engineers, software developers, and the client's own technical team. The project was his life. Alan, meanwhile, had a much smaller supporting role, managing a minor aspect of the vendor procurement. But Alan was clever. He knew he couldn't compete with Mark on substance, so he competed on visibility. Every time Mark's team hit a major milestone, Alan would swoop in. He would take Mark's detailed progress reports, reformat them with a fancier template, add a puff piece of executive summary at the top that emphasized synergy and paradigm-shifting results, and then send it up the chain of command, making sure his name was prominently featured. He'd schedule meetings with the client, ostensibly to discuss his minor part of the project, but would use the time to present Mark's successes as a team achievement that he was proud to be co-leading. Mark saw what was happening, but he was a doer, not a politician. He naively believed that the work would speak for itself, that the senior partners would see through Alan's empty posturing. He chose to focus on his job, on delivering a flawless project, confident that his results would be undeniable. This, unfortunately, was a miscalculation of the corporate environment he was in. He underestimated the power of perception over reality. The final presentation to the client and the firm's partners was a huge success. The system worked perfectly. The client was ecstatic. Mark presented the technical details, the execution, and the results. Then, Alan stood up and gave a soaring, charismatic speech about the strategic vision and the collaborative journey, positioning himself as the maestro who had orchestrated the entire symphony. A week later, the announcement came out. Alan got the promotion. The news hit Mark like a physical blow. He was called into his boss's office and given the standard corporate spiel. It was a very tough decision, his boss said, avoiding his eyes. Alan just demonstrated a bit more of the high-level strategic leadership we were looking for. Mark knew what that meant. It meant Alan had played the game better. While Mark had been in the trenches doing the actual work, Alan had been in the general's tent, taking credit for the victory. The sense of injustice was overwhelming. He had been robbed in broad daylight, and the thieves were now congratulating each other. He sat at his desk that afternoon, the congratulatory email chain for Alan lighting up his screen, and felt a profound sense of disillusionment. He could stay. He could swallow his pride and now report to the very man who had stolen his promotion, the man who would now be his boss. He could spend the next several years watching Alan inevitably take credit for all of his future successes as well. The thought made him feel physically ill. Or he could leave. He looked at the organizational chart. With Alan now in the director role and Mark still as a senior project manager, that meant Alan would be taking over ultimate responsibility for the final, crucial phase of the logistics project, the on-site implementation and the first 6 months of support and optimization. Mark knew the system he had designed inside and out. He knew its strengths, its weaknesses, its quirks. He knew the client's technical team, their personalities, their specific needs. Alan knew none of this. He only knew the PowerPoint version of the project. A slow, cold, calculating thought began to form in Mark's mind. Alan had stolen the promotion, but the promotion came with responsibilities he was utterly unqualified to handle. Alan had been given the keys to a complex machine he had no idea how to operate. Mark's best revenge wouldn't be to stay and fight. It would be to walk away and simply remove the safety net. Without him there to do the actual work, Alan would be completely on his own, exposed for the empty suit he truly was. That afternoon, Mark typed up his resignation letter. He gave his 2 weeks' notice, citing a desire for new opportunities. There was a brief, panicked attempt by management to get him to stay, but he was resolute. During his exit interview, they asked him if there was any particular reason he was leaving. He just smiled and said, "I think Alan is a great choice for the director role. I have complete confidence that he'll handle the final implementation of the logistics project perfectly." It was a statement delivered with such serene, deadpan sincerity that they didn't detect the poison hidden within the words. For his last 2 weeks, he did the bare minimum required for a professional transition. He documented his work, but he didn't, and wasn't asked to perform the kind of in-depth knowledge transfer that would be required for someone to truly take over the project. He answered Alan's questions, which were few and alarmingly superficial. Alan was too high on his victory, too busy measuring his new office for drapes to dive into the technical weeds. He assumed the hard part was over. He was wrong. Mark left the company and took a month off to decompress. Then, he accepted a better-paying, more senior position at a rival firm, but he stayed in touch with some of his old engineering buddies from the team, and through them, he got a front-row seat to the slow-motion disaster he had set in motion. Trouble started almost immediately. A week after Mark left, the client reported a minor bug in the system's sorting algorithm. It was a simple fix, something Mark could have patched in an hour, but Alan had no idea where to even begin. He called a meeting with the engineering team, but since he couldn't describe the problem in any technical detail, the meeting was a waste of time. He told the client they were investigating a solution, a stalling tactic that only made the client more anxious. The 1-hour fix ended up taking a week, and it was a junior engineer who finally figured it out, with no help from his new director. Then came the bigger problems. The client wanted to make a small change to the system's reporting module to better integrate with their own inventory software. It was a planned part of the project, clearly outlined in Mark's original documentation. But Alan had never read the documentation. He saw the request as an unexpected new demand. He tried to push back, telling the client it was out of scope and would require a new contract and additional budget. The client, who had specifically negotiated this feature with Mark months ago, was furious. They saw it as a blatant attempt to nickel and dime them. The relationship, which had been so positive when Mark was in charge, began to sour rapidly. Alan, lacking the deep project knowledge to understand the client's needs, resorted to corporate jargon and blame shifting. He blamed his own engineers for being too slow. He blamed the client for being too demanding. He never once considered that the problem was his own incompetence. The grand finale came about 3 months into Alan's tenure as director. It was time for a major software update to the system. Mark had left detailed instructions on the deployment process, a step-by-step guide, but it required careful coordination and a deep understanding of the system's architecture. Allen, in his arrogance, decided to streamline the process. He skipped several of the testing protocols Mark had established, dismissing them as overly cautious. He pushed the update to go live during the client's peak production hours, wanting to look decisive and efficient. It was a catastrophe. The update, improperly deployed, conflicted with the client's core server software. It didn't just cause a bug, it brought their entire multi-million-dollar manufacturing facility to a grinding halt. The automated logistics system that was supposed to save them time and money was now a digital anchor dragging their entire operation to the bottom. The fallout was immediate and brutal. The client was losing hundreds of thousands of dollars for every hour they were down. The CEO of the client company called the CEO of Mark's old firm, and according to the stories Mark heard, delivered a screaming tirade that could be heard through the closed office door. Allen completely fell apart. Put on a conference call with the furious client and his own company's senior leadership, he had no answers. He couldn't explain what had gone wrong. He couldn't propose a solution. He couldn't do anything but stammer apologies and try to deflect blame. It was a career-ending implosion, broadcast in glorious high definition for everyone to see. In that single, disastrous conference call, the curtain was pulled back, and everyone finally saw the so-called wizard for what he was: a small, incompetent man pulling the wrong levers. It took the firm's best engineers 36 straight hours to roll back the failed update and get the client's facility back online. The trust was broken. The client, who had been on the verge of signing a new, even larger contract with the firm, not only pulled out of that deal, but also threatened a massive lawsuit for breach of contract and damages. Allen was fired the next day. The spectacular failure was so total, so expensive, that it took down not just him, but also the boss who had promoted him. Mark, watching from the safety of his new job, felt a quiet, profound sense of vindication. He hadn't lifted a finger against Allen. He hadn't sabotaged anything. He had simply resigned. His revenge was the void he'd left behind, a void of competence that his replacement was utterly incapable of filling. He had allowed Allen to be crushed under the weight of the very job he had stolen. This story is a powerful lesson in the true nature of leadership and responsibility. Allen was a classic example of someone who is skilled at the metagame of corporate life, the politics, the networking, the visibility, but lacks any of the core skills required for the actual job. He was playing checkers while the job required chess. He coveted the title of director, but had no interest in or capacity for the act of directing. Mark's strategy was brilliant in its simplicity. He recognized that in a complex, high-stakes environment, competence is not a luxury, it's a structural necessity. By removing himself from the equation, he removed the one pillar that was holding the entire project up. He knew Allen had spent all his energy learning how to climb the ladder, and no time at all learning how to hold it steady once he got to the top. The inevitable collapse was just a matter of time. This isn't just about a stolen promotion. It's about the fundamental difference between doing the work and taking the credit. Allen's entire career had been built on the ladder, but when he was finally put in a position where he had no one else's work to steal, where he himself was the final point of accountability, his entire professional facade crumbled into dust. It's a chilling reminder that you can't fake your way to the top, or at least, you can't stay there for very long. And now for our final story. This one is a little different. It's not a tale of a spectacular, immediate collapse. It's a story of quiet, patient, long-simmering revenge. It's about a wrong that was left to fester for a full decade, only to be righted in the most unexpected and professionally devastating way possible. This is a story that proves that karma may not be swift, but its memory is long, and its final judgment can be absolutely brutal. Our storyteller, let's call him Frank, was, 10 years ago, a young and ambitious project manager at a large consulting firm. He was bright, hardworking, and had just spent the better part of a year single-handedly developing a massive, comprehensive efficiency overhaul plan for one of the firm's biggest clients. This wasn't just a report, it was a magnum opus. It involved hundreds of pages of data analysis, workflow redesigns, and a complete strategic roadmap for the client's next 5 years. He had poured everything he had into it, convinced this was the project that would make his career. His boss was a man named Peterson. Peterson was a classic middle manager, insecure in his position and deeply threatened by his talented subordinates. He saw Frank's brilliance not as an asset to his team, but as a threat to his own job security. As Frank neared the completion of his monumental project, Peterson started taking an unusual interest. He'd ask for daily updates, demand copies of all drafts, and nitpick minor details, all under the guise of mentorship. The day of the final presentation to the client arrived. Frank walked into the boardroom, ready to present his year of hard work, but Peterson stopped him. "Frank," he said, putting a paternalistic hand on his shoulder, "I've decided I'm going to handle this one myself. You did great work pulling the data together, but a presentation this high level needs a more senior touch. You can just sit and observe." Frank was stunned, but he was young and didn't feel he could argue. He sat in the back of the room and watched in horror as Peterson presented the entire project, his analysis, his words, his recommendations, as if it were entirely his own. He never mentioned Frank's name once. The client was blown away. They lauded Peterson for his visionary work. The betrayal was absolute, but the insult was about to be compounded by injury. 2 weeks later, the firm announced a round of layoffs due to corporate restructuring. And despite just delivering a hugely successful project, Frank's name was on the list. Peterson, his boss, the man who had just stolen his work, had laid him off. The message was clear: "I have what I need from you, and now you are disposable." Frank was left with a meager severance package and a burning sense of injustice that would stay with him for a very long time. Now we fast forward 10 years. A decade can change a lot. Frank, driven by the sting of that early career betrayal, had become a force in his industry. He had worked for a couple of other firms, earned a stellar reputation, and eventually started his own high-level consulting practice. He was no longer the naive junior employee. He was now the seasoned expert that big companies called in to solve their most difficult problems. He was successful, respected, and the memory of Peterson had faded into a dull scar, a reminder of a lesson learned the hard way. One day, he gets a call from a massive corporation. They want to hire his firm for a very lucrative, very sensitive contract. One of their major divisions has been underperforming for years. It's losing money, missing targets, and is riddled with inefficiencies. They want Frank to come in, do a top-to-bottom audit of the entire division, and present his findings and recommendations directly to the board of directors. The subtext was clear. They wanted him to tell them if the division was salvageable, or if they should just shut it down and cut their losses. Frank took the job. He and his small team spent the next month embedded in the struggling division. They interviewed dozens of employees, analyzed financial records, and mapped out workflows. It was a mess, even worse than they had been led to believe. The leadership was incompetent, the strategy was non-existent, and morale was in the gutter. On his final day of the audit, Frank was scheduled to interview the head of the division, the senior vice president who was ultimately responsible for the entire disaster. Frank walked into the lavish corner office, his preliminary report in his briefcase. He was preparing to meet some generic corporate executive he'd have to professionally eviscerate in his final report. He extended his hand as the man behind the large desk stood up. "Hello, I'm Frank," he started to say, but the words caught in his throat. The man was older, paunchier, and his hair was thinner and grayer, but the face was unmistakable. The smug, self-satisfied look in his eyes was exactly the same. It was Peterson, his old boss, the man who had stolen his work and fired him 10 years ago. A jolt went through Frank. It was a surreal, almost cinematic moment. Peterson, for his part, didn't recognize Frank at all. To him, Frank had just been another nameless, faceless junior employee from a decade ago, a stepping stone he had used and discarded without a second thought. To Peterson, Frank was just another consultant, a hired gun. "Good to meet you," Peterson said, shaking his hand with a limp, disinterested grip. "Let's get this over with. What do you need?" Frank, after the initial shock, felt a sense of calm wash over him. A cold, surgical, and deeply satisfying calm. He conducted the interview with a detached professionalism that bordered on icy. He asked probing, difficult questions about performance metrics, strategic planning, and leadership failures. Peterson blustered and deflected, offering a litany of excuses, blaming the market, his subordinates, the corporate headquarters, everyone but himself. It was the same old Peterson, just with more wrinkles. Frank listened patiently, took his notes, and at the end of the hour he stood up. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Peterson," he said, his voice perfectly neutral. "I believe I have everything I need." 2 weeks later, Frank stood before the corporation's board of directors in their top-floor boardroom. He delivered his final report. It was a brutal, meticulous, and unassailable takedown of Peterson's entire division. He laid out the years of financial losses, the strategic blunders, the systemic failures of leadership. His conclusion was stark and unavoidable. The division was a lost cause. It was a drain on the company's resources, and the leadership was fundamentally incapable of turning it around. His final recommendation was delivered without a trace of emotion. "Based on my comprehensive analysis," he said, looking each board member in the eye, "it is my professional recommendation that you dissolve this division entirely. Eliminate the redundancies, reassign the few high-performing assets to other parts of the company, and terminate the current leadership structure, starting with the senior vice president." He didn't have to say Peterson's name. The board knew exactly who he meant. They accepted his recommendation without a single question. Frank packed up his briefcase and left the building. He never saw Peterson again. He just heard through the grapevine a few weeks later that the entire division had been shut down, and its senior vice president had been unceremoniously fired, his career ending not with a bang, but with the quiet, final stroke of a consultant's pen. Frank's pen. There was no dramatic confrontation, no "I told you so." There was only the quiet, professional satisfaction of a decade-old debt being paid in full with interest. Peterson had stolen Frank's work to advance his career 10 years ago. A decade later, Frank's work was the very thing that ended it. Karma, it turns out, is the ultimate consultant. And that really brings us full circle. This last story is the epitome of cosmic balance. It's the universe finally closing a loophole. For 10 years, Peterson got away with it. He climbed the ladder, likely on the backs of other young, ambitious employees just like Frank. But his incompetence created a debt, and that debt accumulated interest over time. Frank didn't seek out revenge. Revenge found him. He was just doing his job, the job he had become an expert at, and it just so happened that his job was to be the universe's auditor. What's so profoundly satisfying here is the professionalism of the final act. Frank's victory wasn't emotional, it was analytical. His recommendation to fire Peterson wasn't personal. It was the only logical conclusion supported by the data. He simply held up a mirror to Peterson's career, and the reflection was so ugly, so incompetent, that it shattered on its own. It's a testament to the idea that you can only run from your own mediocrity for so long. Eventually, your bill will come due, and sometimes the person handing you the check is the very person you wronged to get ahead in the first place. And there we have it. 5 stories, 5 thieves, and 5 spectacular, self-inflicted failures. In the end, these stories prove a fundamental truth that I think we all understand on an intuitive level. A blueprint is completely worthless in the hands of someone who can't build. The thief can always steal the what, but they can almost never steal the why or the how. Justice, in these cases, isn't really about revenge, is it? It's about gravity. It's about integrity, not just moral integrity, but structural integrity. What goes up without a solid foundation of actual skill and talent must, inevitably, come crashing down. The books, it seems, always balance in the end. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm always fascinated by the way incompetence reveals itself. Have you ever seen someone fail because they took a shortcut and tried to ride on someone else's coattails? Share your story in the comments below. I'd love to read them. And if you enjoyed our deep dive into karmic justice, be sure to like and subscribe for more. Until next time, stay brilliant.